Makes me feel very sad, ashamed and disappointed that this is the behaviour of our health department. They are supposed to be our leaders.
This is Dr. Julie Manasseh. She's got 3 decades under her belt as a GP. But just a few weeks ago, her life here in Perth took a dramatic turn when she accepted a short-term medical assignment.
I was only given 2 hours notice and really no information about the job whatsoever, but I was in charge of 600 guests divided into 2 hotels, approximately 300 at the Crown Promenade and another 300 at the Crown Metropole.
Julie's job was to oversee cruise ship passengers and other overseas arrivals placed in a 14-day hotel quarantine. Suddenly, Julie was in charge of hundreds of people who could be carrying the coronavirus. She says with no personal protection equipment. What sort of PPE were you given?
We were given none. When we arrived at the sites, there was no PPE for us, and it still hadn't arrived by the end of the first week that I had been working there.
Julie also says that she was never told when a passenger in her care tested positive to coronavirus.
We, the doctors at the coalface, were never informed of any result, whether positive or negative, by the health department.
Julie was also horrified by the treatment of the guests.
We had a lot of very anxious, stressed, upset guests who were literally on the edge.
One of her patients was a Navy veteran suffering from long-standing PTSD.
This was a man who had ample medical grounds for exemption. We just asked for him to have a room where he could have like an outdoor area to at least not be completely closed in.
Just let me out!
You're gonna get out.
But he was knocked back time and time again in spite of 3 doctors and a psychiatrist who also desperately was wanting to get him out of there.
Eventually, the patient was moved to another hotel with a small garden. But then Julie discovered something more serious. Guests were being let out of quarantine without her sign-off.
I noticed there was an ambulance outside the Crown Prom, and I thought to myself, I know I didn't call that ambulance.
So she fronted the ambulance crew and 2 police officers.
They said, well, apparently there's some sort of directive from public health to release a guest early from quarantine. I said, really? Last time I checked, I thought I was the doctor who was in charge of all the guests here in quarantine.
The guest was an elderly woman with dozens of underlying medical conditions, and she'd only been in quarantine for 4 days after arriving from Bali.
She started threatening me that she would make sure that I never worked again. She goes, you know, I had spoken to my GP. I told him that I have claustrophobia and I hate being in a hotel room like this. And he made some phone calls, and that's why I'm being let out, and you're trying to stop this.
The woman was taken to hospital for medical assessment and then brought back to the hotel quarantine. But the next day, when Julie was off duty, the woman was released, and then Julie was sacked.
Sunday afternoon at approximately 3 p.m, I received a phone call to inform me that I was no longer wanted to come back to the job by the health department.
Julie's not the only doctor who's seen guests released without sign-off from Perth's quarantine hotels. We were shown this WhatsApp message from another doctor.
Same thing at our hotel. Someone who got released last night, unbeknownst to me.
So how could somebody check out of a hotel when these 14-day isolation periods are mandatory? How could they possibly sneak out?
Well, the only way would be when a directive is issued by our chief or deputy chief medical officers of public health, other than by ambulance.
Dr. Andrew Miller is the WA president of the Australian Medical Association.
There's been a great deal of confusion from several of the doctors who've spoken to me about who's actually in charge. The whole thing needs clear lines of reporting, proper notes, proper protective equipment so that people can examine the patients properly, and it's sounding a little bit like the whole thing was Keystone Cops to start out with.
Do you think this is a disaster just waiting to happen in WA?
Yes, it is actually a disaster that is already happening. What we've been hearing on the media is how brilliantly we've been handling this and how we flattened our curve, but the Public Health and WA Health are themselves blatantly flouting their own quarantine laws in doing what they've done.
If people have been let go from quarantine early, then that undermines the entire basis of what we're trying to do here. So if it is the case that people have been told, well, you don't have to serve out your quarantine, you can go on your way, on what basis would that be happening? I think there's questions to be answered there.
Are you concerned about repercussions for speaking out like this?
I felt compelled to speak out so that someone somewhere in the echelons of government who does hold the power can change the current situation that is very, very dangerous.
Well, the WA Health Department sent us a statement saying that some passengers have been released from quarantine early to spend the balance of their 14 days in a, quote, more appropriate setting with the approval of health authorities and police. They also deny there was a lack of protective equipment. Healthcare Australia told us operational and contractual reasons prevented them from commenting on why Julie was sacked. Both statements are on our website.
Well, concerning story to say the least. Stick around.